Miami kicks off their series versus the Philadelphia 76ers on Monday, so we'll be previewing the matchup with NBA writer and podcaster Bryan Toporek to look at how injuries will impact the series, key matchups, if coaching could be a factor, before offering our predictions on the series. All that and more in a great episode to get you ready on today's playoff edition of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Heat Nation. It's a Monday edition of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat. However, you may be listening or watching on YouTube, Odyssey, or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. I'm David Ramil, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Wes Goldberg. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're less than 24 hours away from the start of Game 1 versus the Sixers. And so to help us preview the series is a writer from Forbes and FanSided, as well as the co-host of the NBA podcast. It's Bryan Toporek. How's it going, Bryan?
It's going well. Thanks for having me, guys. It was going better before Friday. It's been a little rough the last couple of days.
Did something happen on Friday? I can't recall.
Yeah. Well, technically it happened on Thursday. I just didn't know the severity until Friday.
Yeah. What did you make of it? We're obviously talking about the injury to Joel Embiid sustained in Game 5 versus the Toronto. Oh, Game 6? No, Game 6 versus the Toronto Raptors. Pascal Siakam elbowing him slightly. Did you think it was an egregious foul? Because I know Sixers fans are already calling for Siakam's head, warning him that he can't enter the city of brotherly love. Did you think it was as bad as it looked?
I mean, it's just one of those things that happens. I don't think there was any ill intent there. I don't think it was malicious. I think I have more problem with the Raptors announcer who said that he got what he deserved because the play right before Embiid did the airplane celebration that he broke out during the 2019 conference semifinals, and the announcers were aghast, and then Siakam pops him on the next play and he's like, karma. And so that I have more problem with than the actual foul.
Well, you won't get that from Heat broadcasters won't be covering the game anyway, but it shouldn't be a problem. I think Heat fans... No, I take that back. Heat fans are a lot less rational than Raptors fans, so we'll see. It's definitely going to be a highly contentious series, at least on NBA Twitter. But let's get into it because injuries look like they'll already be playing a heavy role in the series. On the Sixers side of things, of course, the loss of MVP candidate Joel Embiid. He suffered a slight fracture of the right orbital bone, as well as a slight concussion. He's entered the league's concussion protocols and will not be traveling with the team, per reports, to Miami. Will be out for games 1 and 2. With a potential return for Game 3 on Friday. Bryan, outside of Embiid's incredible production, how does the injury change things up for Philadelphia?
I mean, it changes everything. The team revolves around him on both sides of the floor. So I'm trying to still wrestle with whether they're going to miss him more offensively or defensively. And I honestly don't know the answer. That's the type of an impact that he has. Doc Rivers has said he's going to turn to potentially all 4 of their other bigs. So that's second-year big man Paul Reed, who was the primary backup center against Toronto. DeAndre Jordan, who looks like he can't play basketball anymore, but we might end up seeing him. Paul Millsap, and then Charles Bassey, a rookie. He had a shoulder injury late in the year, but sounds like he's practicing in full, so he might get some burn too. And then I'm curious, especially if or when the Heat go PJ Tucker at the 5, just completely downsize. Do we see the Heat the Sixers do the same? And do like a George Niang, Tobias Harris front court, because Doc said DeAndre Jordan's size in that one regular season matchup made a positive impact, but I am skeptical of that holding up over the course of a 7-game series or however long Joel Embiid is out.
Yeah, I think this going small thing is a really interesting option that we could see whether or not the Heat even go small first with PJ at the 5. If these 4 centers who you're talking about just can't hold up, maybe Doc just does it, and maybe he dictates the terms of engagement a little bit that way. The DeAndre Jordan thing too is going to be really interesting because, like you said, he doesn't look very good anymore, hasn't in a while. And I'm kind of already getting like, Scott Brooks being in love with Kendrick Perkins in the 2012 finals kind of vibes. Like, is Doc Rivers' loyalty to DeAndre Jordan something that could get in the way potentially of, better players, better lineups, and things like that? But before we move off the Embiid topic, Brian, like, what's the general tenor of Sixers fans, the 76ers, and all of these kinds of things? Like, they're leaving open the possibility that he could play in game 3 and game 4, but what are your thoughts on the vibes and how realistic that might be?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like that's kind of what they're banking on at this point. And I will say the one thing that makes the Sixers possibly like not more dangerous in the sense of like they are a far better team with Joel Embiid on the floor, obviously. But now expectations are gone. Like they went from this was supposed to be a close series, like sportsbooks had it as the Heat were a slight favorite on Friday morning. Now they are a pretty commanding favorite. So no one expects the Sixers to win. And now I think they could play a little more freely with the weight of expectations off of their shoulders. And I'm also curious, like, James Harden, I don't think we're going to see the Houston version of him where he's scoring 35 points a night. Because in part because the Heat have the personnel to really give him some trouble in this series. But, Doc has also said, like, we're going to recalibrate kind of around James and be a more James-centric team, which means I think more floor spacing in general. And maybe like we just see especially if we do see some small ball, like we haven't seen James with 4 shooters before. So what does that look like?
Maybe he's more engaged, right? Maybe he's a little bit more excited. He's like, finally, this big guy's not in my way anymore. I could be the star that I've been supposed to be here.
Oh God, I hope. I mean, I would be surprised if James, goes back to the like MVP version of himself. But clearly he's going to have to take on a bigger role, and Tyrese Maxey is going to take. Yeah. I think he is the swing factor until Embiid returns.
He's been good against Miami all season too.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that kind of playing loosely and play a little more freely, because that's certainly something that Miami fans have seen all year long. And they're kind of looking at it, well, Embiid's out, so the series is kind of over before it's even begun. But the reality is we've seen players in the Miami side of things step up all season long in place of Bam Adebayo when he missed significant time, Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, etc. And we're already moving forward with game 1 without Kyle Lowry. So, Wes, we've got no Lowry here. Who do you think starts in his place?
Yeah. I think it's Gabe again. I see no reason not to, keep starting Gabe Vincent there. But it doesn't mean that Gabe Vincent's going to play 30 minutes. Gabe Vincent could play 17 minutes. I don't know. It just depends on whether or not the shot is going for him and what his defense looks like, because Gabe Vincent got his minutes because of his defense on Trae Young. I think Gabe Vincent's a really good defender. I just think James Harden is a really different kind of assignment than the Trae Young one was. Like, Gabe Vincent is not the biggest dude, but against Trae Young, that didn't really matter. Against James Harden, Harden's a big guy, and I don't know what Gabe Vincent, how he'll handle that matchup, if he even gets that matchup, because Jimmy Butler's back. I could see Jimmy picking up the James Harden matchup, but they switch so much that Gabe's going to end up on these big guys, whether it's James Harden, Tobias Harris, Tyrese Maxey. I mean, there's guys, there are way better weapons on the Sixers than there were on the Hawks. I think that's fair to say. So if Gabe Vincent can hold up, I think he continues to get the start throughout the series until Lowry does come back and continues to get the minutes. But if not, like this opens the door for Victor Oladipo, who, of course, we saw close the series in a strong way against Atlanta. And I'm not sure that we get Oladipo starting at point guard, but it is notable that Oladipo basically played point guard more than in that Hawks series, more than he did in the regular season, right? So maybe, I don't know. Obviously, they didn't know that Kyle Lowry wasn't going to be available, but the Heat are obviously comfortable playing Oladipo in those spots.
Well, he was bringing the ball up, but alongside Gabe Vincent, who was still out there kind of as a floor stabilizer, play initiator, things of that sort. I just don't know if you can afford to put him directly into the starting lineup in place.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah,
I was just saying he might end up getting a bunch of minutes. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's fair. But I've seen people call for Oladipo starting because of that strong showing in Game 5 versus Atlanta, and I think it's just apples to very bad oranges. It's not a fair comparison.
I mean, Bam didn't play that well. They should just start Oladipo at center at this point. I mean, we're just gonna
cosign, strong cosign of that.
Yeah, I'm sure you're happy with it. Can Paul Reed outplay Victor Oladipo at center? Wait and see.
Great.
Who gets to start before we wrap up the segment? Who gets to start? Because it looks like it's probably Reed, but I could see DJ getting the nod too.
God, it should be Reed, but as you brought up, Wes, like Doc's loyalty to DJ was the storyline for like most of March in Sixers Twitter. And it literally, I mean, I don't know if it was the collective bullying from every Sixers Twitter member and media member to be like, why are you still playing DeAndre Jordan? He can't move anymore.
Right.
Like finally he dusted off Paul Reed for those last couple regular season games. I think, he's so foul prone. That's the one big problem with him. And, Doc has said like he's going to get in foul trouble in this series and we have to be really careful because he's worried, especially like Jimmy Butler could draw a ton of fouls on him. So I think even if Reed gets the start, we are going to end up seeing Millsap, Jordan, Bassey. Like I think they really do have to go by committee until Embiid returns, just because like I would be shocked if Paul Reed is capable of staying on the floor for 36 minutes without picking up 18 fouls.
Now, well, speaking of Doc Rivers, we'll talk about that coaching matchup as well as some other key player matchups during the series. And before we offer our predictions later on in the show, but before we do that, just wanted to tell you a little bit about BetOnline.net, your number one source for all of your betting stats and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure to go check out Locked On NBA Big Board. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and the author of the NBA Big Board newsletter is joined by Richard Stayman, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock draft player rankings, and of course, big boards. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Brian, we're here with Bryan Toporek, first of all, offering his perspective on the Philadelphia 76ers matchup versus Miami. Game 1 set to tip off at 7:30 p.m. on Monday. And we were just talking about Doc Rivers, much maligned Doc Rivers, who again threw all of his former players under the bus just last week when it looked like the Sixers season might tank against the suddenly surging Toronto Raptors. What's the Doc Rivers experiment like? I mean, what is it just like covering him? Because it just seems so hard to predict exactly where he's going to go from one game to the next. And Wes and I talked about, we love Doc. Everybody loves Doc. And at the same time, it's just so hard to get a read on him. And of course, there's all the past failures on his resume that always seem to get brought up, and that he gets very ornery and he doesn't like responding to questions about it, even though they're perfectly valid questions. What's it like talking to and covering Doc?
Yeah, it's so interesting because last year it really wasn't contentious at all. Like things just went so well for the Sixers during the regular season. So like the cracks clearly started to form in that Atlanta series, and then just the Ben Simmons situation hanging over the team for most of the year. And now all these questions, especially late in the season, about his rotations, about his loyalty to DeAndre Jordan, about the 3-0 leads. I can't tell if he's feeling the pressure or maybe he's trying to book his way out of Philly and trying to get to the Lakers this offseason. I don't know. It has felt very different this year compared to last year. And I think it's a product of circumstances. I'll say I don't think he is as bad as the perception is.
Yes.
But I also don't think he's like the greatest coach in the NBA. Right. I think there are some clear flaws, but in that Raptors series, before that started, I went on Twitter and asked, like, if nothing else changed, just switch the coaches and nothing else, what would be your prediction for the series? And a lot of people chose like Sixers in 4 or 5 or Sixers in 6 and 7. And then I said, all right, what's your actual prediction? And it was much more aligned to the Raptors. So, I think this is a coaching mismatch. I think Eric Spoelstra is clearly a better coach than Doc Rivers, especially with in-game adjustments.
They're both top 15 NBA history.
That's right. That's right. I do think Doc, other than Game 5 of the Raptors series, I actually think he did pretty well in the Raptors series.
Yeah, I agree.
So, as much as he has gotten criticized, and he's getting criticized now for leaving Joel Embiid in the fourth quarter, or the last couple minutes of the fourth quarter in Game 6, which is when he got hurt. I think for that, it was just, he's heard the chatter and he was not about to let them blow a 3-0 lead, even if it ended up coming at the expense of his star player. So I'm really curious to see what he does at center, how he handles, reshaping this around the Harden, Maxey backcourt as your primary scoring options. And then,
Yeah.
I think we'll probably get into this, but like the Sixers have not had the personnel in past years to really attack mismatches. Like Ben Simmons is just not that type of a player in the half court. With Maxey, but now especially with Harden, they do have that. So I'm curious, to get your guys' thoughts, especially when guys like Tyler Herro are on the floor or Duncan Robinson. I don't know how much he's going to play in the series because I do think, like Doc has said many times, if we find something and we can exploit it, we're going to. We are just going to keep running the same play over and over again until you prove you can stop it. And we saw that in the regular season game without Embiid and Harden. They just went at Tyler Herro in the fourth quarter. So that is something I'm keeping an eye on in this matchup.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and to me, that's sort of the key question that's facing Miami going into this series is, can you play Duncan Robinson and can you play Tyler Herro? First of all, Tyler Herro did not have a good series against the Hawks, and I think the way that the Sixers play with Atlanta, they like to switch and trap and put length and put two on the ball in those kind of situations. Philadelphia is a little bit more classic kind of drop coverage and things like that, where Tyler Herro has typically played well against this season. So I'd be interested to see if he can, get back to where he was offensively, which was basically a 20-point per game scorer in the regular season. Because when he's doing that, you sort of live with the stuff defensively, right? Getting attacked over and over again. But in that Atlanta series, he had the worst plus minus of any Heat player, which is not what the sixth man of the year should have. So, that's going to be key. And then Duncan Robinson, it's sort of the same thing, but he, kind of more magnetized on just the 3-point shooting. Obviously, like if those threes are going in, leave him out there because he's getting you 3 and he's giving up 2 on the other end. It's fine. Just keep doing it. That's a good math problem. But if not, I don't know. And they also have been playing Tyler and Duncan off the bench together for most of the regular season since revamping the rotation. I don't think that they can do that in this series at all. I think that there's too much. That's giving too many weak spots for the Sixers to choose from. I don't think that they can do that, which is, again, why we go back to Oladipo and why this could be a series where he gets some major minutes.
Oladipo and Caleb Martin. I think you could see both of them getting significant playing time because they're both strong defenders and certainly stronger than either Herro or Robinson. And so you could see them playing in conjunction alongside any one of those players, depending on who has the hot hand. I mean, Tyler's going to get the bulk of those minutes. If any player is left out of the rotation, I think we're all pretty much in agreement. It's likely Duncan Robinson, even though it seems like he could take advantage of that drop coverage. I mean, there'll be soft spots along the perimeter there where he could take advantage of it. And we've seen Duncan.
Well, especially those handoffs with Bam. Right, where Embiid's not going to come up, right? He's going to play back. Duncan Robinson's played well against the Sixers historically.
Yep.
What about Reed's? Yeah, definitely. Reed's defense, I mean, he's a little bit more switchable, I suppose, a little bit more mobile given his size. Is he a guy who can play out in the perimeter a little bit? Is he a guy who can get victimized on the 3-point shooting?
Yeah, he definitely is going to be their most switchable option. We were seeing that in the Toronto series. He was not as traditional drop. So I think that is another among the many reasons that he should be the starting center. That is one of them. The Heat just have too many guys who can get loose off of those screens, off of the Bam dribble handoffs, as you mentioned. And, if any of them catch heat or catch fire, it's like, all right, pack it up. That's probably the game. So I'm curious to see, do they stick to their traditional scheme or do they just have Paul Reed come out and then, make sure you've got the weak side rotations really in sync?
One of the other things I want to make a note of that I'm looking for in this, just from the coaching standpoint and just sort of the player personnel standpoint, is both teams in transition are kind of similar in that they like to be very opportunistic. I'm pretty sure both of these teams rank near the bottom of the league in pace. They're not getting out and running off of misses and makes a ton, but when they do, they're really, really good at it. And and they're different too. I mean, Tyrese Maxey is great in transition just with his sheer speed, right? And with the Heat guys like Kyle Lowry, if he's playing, Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, they're really good at getting rebounds and getting it down the court with outlet passes really fast, even though they're not athletically as fast as a guy like Tyrese Maxey. They're really good at getting out in transition too. And I think that's going to be a big part of how both of those teams pick their spots to try to take advantage of those points. And, conversely, defensively, how they, kind of keep their head on a swivel, so to speak, and make sure that they're not giving up a ton of those opportunities on the defensive end. For Miami, I really have a hard time figuring out who's going to guard Tyrese Maxey. And for the Sixers, we've seen them being prone to just, brain farts, and I think that he could get a lot of wide open looks in transition just because the Sixers aren't ready for it. So that's I think another key battleground for the series.
Yeah,
I think we. Okay, go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think the Raptors series without Embiid's injury would have been really good preparation for this series for the Sixers, because both teams are somewhat similar defensively in that they're just going to switch everything. But the Raptors are also so good on the offensive glass and want to push the pace in transition that the Sixers really locked in on that, especially in the first couple games. They kind of lost their focus as the series went on up until Game 6. But because we saw such inconsistent effort from them in the regular season, and then we saw, they actually did just flip the switch in the playoffs, I thought, okay, like that's what gave me somewhat confidence going into this series prior to the Embiid news. But now it's just, that's such a big piece to replace.
Yeah. No, I was just going to mention that I think we start to see Jimmy Butler start off on Tyrese Maxey. I think that's a matchup that he would take over. Yeah, honestly. And I think we're looking at PJ Tucker being a primary defender on Harden just because of the familiarity factor there. Like he's already been tapped into as a resource for Eric Spoelstra. He's very familiar with him. He mentioned that in a recent practice and things of that sort. So I could imagine a world where Tucker starts off. Again, none of this really matters because of Miami's heavy switching defense. But I think Tucker starts off on Harden with Vincent probably keying in on Danny Green, and then Strus covering Tobias Harris to start off with, and of course Bam picking up that center match.
Yeah.
Do you think that
it does matter? It matters a little bit just because, like you said, they switch everything, and you kind of have to, all right, so what's Philadelphia triggering that switch with? Usually it's a pick and roll with Joel Embiid, but Embiid's not going to be there. So, like, in the regular season, they put Jimmy Butler on James Harden more often. But that doesn't really mean anything. It's the playoffs. It's Eric Spoelstra. I don't think that means much. But that also made sure, okay, when you're switching stuff, and if it's Embiid or Tobias Harris, Jimmy Butler's not going to be overwhelmed. PJ Tucker, same thing. You could say the same thing for him, right? Same deal. But now that Embiid's not going to be there, okay, where are they triggering these switches with? Are they doing small actions with Maxey and Harden? Well, if that's the case, maybe you play it a little bit more straight up with Gabe Vincent or Kyle Lowry when he's there. I think Jimmy Butler can obviously hold up well in that matchup too. So that's just I don't really know where he's going to go with this. I think I do know this. It's going to be a lot of different looks. He's going to switch up he's going to switch up the looks. He's going to throw a lot of different matchups. Same thing like with Trae Young, but I think we'll see a lot less of the trapping stuff, and I think we'll just see one-on-one assignments with Harden and just being like, all right, we're going to play this straight up and not let the other shooters kill you because, you're not really worried about Kevin Herter. Sorry, Kevin Herter, but you're just not. You are worried about like Tobias Harris and Maxey and these other guys that the Sixers have.
Yeah, that's what Toronto was doing in the first couple games, was trapping Harden. And it he just, Game 6 he looked fresh and he had burst, but like you're gonna make him prove that he has it over the course of an entire series before. It's weird to say about a guy who averaged 30 plus a couple seasons ago, but like whether it's the hamstring, whether it's age, he just can't beat guys off the dribble like he once did. So I think I trust Miami's coaching staff has watched the tape and has seen that. So I would also expect, more one-on-one, less trapping, because that's where Harden can beat you. He's such a good passer and he's got the vision. And as you said, Maxey and Harris have both been lights out in the playoffs, especially.
David, are you rooting for the PJ versus Harden matchup? Is that why? Are you trying to make it happen? Like, what do you think PJ knows about James Harden? Like, do you think he knows, like, if I just say this to him, he'll get completely, like, unraveled or something? Like, what do you think he knows about James Harden?
It's just how to avoid getting locked up. We've seen Harden using his hands and arms so creatively to draw fouls. I think, look, everybody's going to get into foul trouble at some point, especially with Harden having a higher usage rate, having to take over. At least that's the expectation. And given that Tucker's familiarity with him and having guarded him in practice for years, I think probably gets him a little bit more of an edge than some other players. I don't know. It's probably a slight advantage.
Should he wear his Milwaukee championship ring while they're playing and just be like, I have one of these now? No thanks to you.
Throw a wad of singles at him, maybe distract him a little bit. We'll see what happens.
Hey, man, I got your reservations at Tootsie's. Right. Like, really?
Well, what you kind of hinted at it before. You talked about it in the first segment. You brought it up now, but what do you expect from Harden? Because I know that's something that I'm curious about. Is like, what version of James are we going to see? I know you said you were not going to see the Houston Rockets version, but you brought up that he's had some flashes, some moments in Philadelphia. His passing certainly something to consider. But like, given that Embiid's out, what do you think is going to happen with James Harden tomorrow night?
Yeah, I mean, I hope he goes into the game with the same mindset that he did in Game 6 of the Raptors series, where he clearly was trying to attack the basket early, trying to establish himself as a scorer, trying to make them rethink their defensive coverage on him. And then you could start spraying it out and start being more of the point guard again. So I think he knows, like, remove Joel Embiid. That is 30 points per game. Like, you're going to need more from everyone, but like, this is why you acquire James Harden instead of a Tyrese Halliburton or someone like that. Like, you want a ready-made superstar. God forbid if Joel Embiid does get hurt, which unfortunately he did. Like, you have someone who's able to fill in his place. So I don't know if he's going to score 30 in any game of this series, but that's because, as you guys have pointed out, like, the Heat have the defensive personnel to give him trouble. But I also don't think he's going to have like a 12 points on 3 of 9 shooting or something like that. Like, he knows he's going to have to get at least 15 to 20 shots up in this game.
Yeah, good point. All right. Well, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the key matchups in the series, as well as offering our predictions in the next segment. But before we do that, just wanted to tell you about Built Bar. Summer is coming, and with summer, you're going to need some food on the go. Built Bars are the perfect snack to take with you on family vacations, a trip to the beach, etc. You just throw them in your bags and your kids' backpacks. Make sure that everyone has a bar so that you're fueled for your summer adventures. So many great flavors to choose from. You can get a mix box with all of your favorites. Try some of their new puffed marshmallow bars. They're delicious. Again, soft, easy to chew, 100% covered in chocolate. You can't go wrong with Built Bar. So go to Built.com right now. Use the promo code LOCKED15 and you get 15% off your next order of Built Bars, but only if you go to Built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your next order of Built Bar. Just a reminder, you can always reach us via email at lockedonheat@gmail.com or via Twitter using the hashtag AskLOHeat. Be sure to please subscribe to the show and leave a review. We'll always be providing the best coverage possible throughout the playoffs, so make sure to subscribe. And always, again, leave some comments, feedbacks, reviews. We're all are welcome here. We're here with Bryan Toporek, and we're talking about the Philadelphia 76ers matchup. You mentioned Tobias Harris briefly, and I think that's one of the biggest X factors there. I think Maxey seems like he's probably a more dangerous option. At least we've seen him burn Miami this season. At the same time, I just think Tobias Harris is like the key for Philadelphia's success. Like, they win if Tobias gets going. At least that's the way I see it. Maybe that's oversimplistic, and I might be dead wrong on that. But I think he's just given his versatility, given his three-point shooting, and he has been very good for Philadelphia, at least mostly. I just see him as a very dangerous weapon. What is the key to Miami stopping Tobias Harris, and how important do you think he is to Philadelphia's chances at success this season?
Yeah, I think he's huge. I think, when they acquired Harden, he was like the last guy to really get going. Like, Embiid got it right away. Maxey got it right away. Even Thibault, they started figuring out ways to get him going. And Tobias was struggling initially. And then finally, like, something just clicked. Like, Doc Rivers for the last 2 years has just been like, dude, stop overthinking it. If you catch it, just shoot it. And finally, we started seeing Tobias do that. And he's just it completely transformed him as a player. Right. He was also much more locked in defensively, especially in the first round. He had to guard Pascal Siakam. He, more like Siakam got his, of course, because you're not going to totally stop him. But I thought he did a pretty admirable job on that end of the floor, and he's credited, having James Harden there, because he doesn't have to create as much on offense, so he can devote more energy to defense. So I think especially if the matchups go as you guys are mentioning earlier with Butler and Tucker on Maxey and Harden, that means Tobias, in theory, is going to have a potential size advantage or speed advantage on whoever is guarding him. So they're going to need him. Like, Maxey and Harden can't do everything, and especially with Embiid out, like, they need that third consistent guy. As much as I love Danny Green, like, you're going to get a couple 3-pointers from Danny Green, but if you're asking Danny Green to create off the dribble, you're in trouble. Like Paul Reed, maybe we get some lobs, some offensive putbacks, like it's a pick and roll, but like, he is not going to, draw a ton of fouls like Embiid does, or be able to shoot over triple teams like Embiid does. So I think it's a lot more like, maybe we see more pick and rolls involving Tobias, which we really haven't seen all that much.
Well, I was going to ask you that because we talked about that game in March where they didn't have Embiid or Harden, and they did just run Tobias Harris pick and rolls and poked at Tyler Herro for that entire fourth quarter stretch where the Sixers basically won the game. But it doesn't sound like that's a typical part of the offense. That was more of just because they had to do something in that game. But maybe they do have a little bit more confidence because they saw it in March to maybe do it in this series. It will be interesting.
Yeah. And Doc said, like, we have to just reinvent ourselves without Embiid. Like, I guess, the silver lining of this is that if they figure out a way to have success without Embiid on the floor, if he is able to return later in the series, maybe they'll have more confidence in those, however many minutes he doesn't play, and give themselves a little bit more of an Embiidless identity. And like Harden has, okay, now this is my team for 10 minutes. I'm going to do what I did in games 1 and 2.
David, the more we're talking around like the defensive matchups and all this stuff, the thing I keep thinking is I think we're going to see so much zone in this series, right? Because we saw Philly break it out against Toronto. We know that Eric Spoelstra loves him some zone at times. I don't think, like, obviously against Atlanta, we didn't really see a whole lot of zone because they had a game plan that was very specific and tailor-made for Trae Young. But yeah, if you want to stop Tyrese Maxey from getting downhill, if you want to stop James Harden from getting downhill, throw a zone out there. If you want to force Philly to beat you from the perimeter, that's a way to do it. And likewise for Philly, right? Like, especially if they're going to be giving up a bunch of size without Joel Embiid, pack the paint with bodies and force Duncan Robinson and Max Strus to beat you instead of Bam Adebayo and Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, that's a good point. And even on the offensive side of things, I mean, Bam Adebayo just now that he doesn't have to worry about the Embiid matchup a lot as much, he can be a lot more mobile. We've seen him obviously be a great helper on the defense. He's just a guy who can pick up those matchups. So I could see him being such an important factor. I mean, he's going to be a huge factor defensively regardless, but just his ability to be able to stop those matchups. Like if Strus is getting picked on by Harris, or if anybody's getting picked on by Harris, seeing Bam out there just floating around in that zone coverage would be such an added bonus for Miami, and he'll be able to lock down almost anybody on the Philadelphia side of things. But is there another key match aside from the zone and the overall sequencing of defense? Is there anybody else that you think has to have a huge series? Because for me, my money's on Tyler Herro. We haven't seen that from him in Atlanta, but is there anybody else that you think needs to step up for Miami?
No, Tyler's the main one, and then I do like Jimmy Butler has not played the Sixers well this season. He's only averaging 18.7 points on about 37% shooting, a little bit less than that. He needs to be. But
he wasn't a 3-point specialist until now, so
that's true. Yeah, that's true. When he kidnapped Seth Curry's soul and just became a 3-point shooter, that's been helpful. And Bam's numbers haven't been great against the Sixers either. Now, not having Joel Embiid in the middle is going to open up those driving lanes and everything like that. So I expect that to change rather dramatically. But those are the guys. That's not not rocket science. You need your 3 best offensive players to be your 3 best offensive players. It's not the Hawks anymore. You're playing a real playoff team now.
Are you concerned about Lowry missing more time? Because I thought having the extended rest and then missing games 4 or 5 against Atlanta, I thought that he'd have enough time to recover. Maybe they just don't want to push it because they do have championship aspirations.
I'm concerned. I don't like it. I don't like this. I don't like the way that it sounds. Yeah, I just and the Heat have always played really coy. They haven't practiced. He has not practiced. I'm curious, like who we see first in this series, Kyle Lowry or Joel Embiid. I think a lot of people would have assumed it would be Lowry, but I'm not ready to say that. I really don't know. I would probably bet we see Embiid before we see Lowry.
Oh, that would be a huge.
That's my bold prediction for the game. Yeah. Now I don't have to give you a serious prediction. That's my prediction.
No, you still have to do that. In fact, I'm going to kick it to you right now. Let's get into it. Wrapping up today's episode. Yeah, all right. Wrapping up today's episode. What talk about? What do you think?
I think we should give it to the guest first, and because we're the most polite Miami Heat podcast around.
All right, let's do it. Bryan, I know you've already offered it online. You wrote about it for Forbes.com. Everybody should go check that out. Of course, what do you think is the likely outcome of the series moving forward?
Yeah, I might need to change that now that the Embiid news came out that he might actually be back for games 3 or 4. Because as soon as I saw it, I thought he's just done for the series. There's no way. Like he broke his face a couple of years ago and was out for 3 weeks, and came back against Miami in the mask. So I thought that was the likely timeline. So if I originally
will he wear a mask?
Yeah.
He's going to wear the mask.
He hated it, but he's going to have to. I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, He can't take that chance again. And I was just thinking, like, I don't know that Heat players are necessarily going to be the type to target, but they are so physical anyway. Like somebody's going to throw an elbow at some point, even if it's an inadvertent one. Whether it's Tucker or Bam or somebody, they're going to clock him upside the head and they're going to aggravate things. Mask or no mask. Like even if he does come back, he could potentially miss time again. He could re-aggravate that injury. And I know he has to go out there just to save Philadelphia's season, but there's a likely chance of him re-aggravating that injury at some point. But anyway, you were saying, Brian?
Yeah, I think he's got the torn UCL in his thumb, so things are just going great at this
point. That's
right. Right. So before the face injury, I was leaning Sixers in 7. That was when Friday morning my preview went up on Forbes, and I just thought, I think this would have been a classic playoff battle. I didn't know about Lowry's status either, but I just can't get over, like, how do the Heat hide Herro and Robinson? As you said, like, they probably just remove Robinson if it's an issue, but Herro is just too important to them. And the mismatch hunting that the Sixers are capable of, I thought, with Embiid in the fold, it would be close, but that was how I was leaning. Then the Embiid news came out. I immediately pivoted to the Heat in 5. Now, like, if he's back for game 3 and Lowry misses the first 2 games, all I have to do is steal 1 in Miami. Like, I lead like Heat in 6 now, I think, but it's just so hard to say until we know when these guys are coming back. Like if Embiid misses the whole series or Lowry misses the whole series, it's a totally different thing. So assuming, like, let's say both guys are back by game 3, I'll go Heat in 6.
Yeah, good point. Wes?
That's what I have. I've got Heat in 6. But this is an impossible prediction. Like Brian said,
I know.
Joel Embiid could miss the entire thing. It could be Heat in 4. Kyle Lowry can never come back, and it could be Sixers in 7, even if Embiid misses half the series, right? So I have no idea, but I'll go Heat in 6.
Yeah, I see this.
And all the excuse people coming in after that. That's my real prediction. Is if the Heat win this series, it's going to be they didn't have to play Joel Embiid. That's why I just wanted Joel Embiid to play the series. I'm really bummed out, if I'm being honest about the news. It sucks, but
yeah, I think there's something to that. Like I mean, like Miami, it's been 2 seasons and Miami is still getting bubble fraud, accusations on NBA Twitter. So I mean, they can't do enough to dispel any chances, any negative perception of that. I think it's still going to talk. But having said that, looking at this team, and I've been pretty, active in saying this all season long, they understand the assignment better than any past Heat team. I think they understand what's at stake here, which is kind of why I think they're resting Lowry, is because they have a bigger picture that they want to be a part of moving forward for title contention. Mm-hmm. I think they'll win the first 2 games at home. I think they'll be able to take 1 in Philadelphia. And I think once they go back home, they're going to want to close out the series. They're not going to want to go back to Philadelphia, especially if Embiid returns, give him another opportunity to come back. So I'm being too optimistic, but I'm saying Heat in 5.
It's a good point you make there. I didn't really think about that, but the longer Joel Embiid is out, like the more, the more reason the Heat have to play harder every game that Embiid's not playing is get this series over as quickly as possible. Because if Joel Embiid comes back by game 4, who knows what can happen, right? Like the Sixers could, theoretically win 4 straight games and win the series. So, it's a really good point by you.
Well, that'll do it for today's show. Brian, thanks so much for taking the time. Why don't you tell all our listeners where they can find you and all your great work?
Sure. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at BToporek. You can find me on Forbes Sports at FanSided and my podcast, the NBA Podcast. I joked last episode that was my last one because it was right after the Embiid news. So it's just like, I'm out. I'm going to forget basketball exists afterwards. So see who my co-host chooses as new co-host.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. Remember, you can always reach us via email at Locked On Heat. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make your second listen Locked On NBA. From the first jump ball of the play-in tournament to the last possession of the NBA Finals, Locked On experts give you their take inside the playoffs with insight and analysis affecting all 30 teams. This is David Ramil signing up for now. Thanks so much for joining me, Wes.
Wrap it up, B.